You're listening to episode 118 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Tim Ward, author of What the Buddha Never Taught, joins us again to talk about Buddhist practice, meme theory, and his new book, Zombies on Kilimanjaro, A Father-Son Journey Above the Clouds. As we talk about the evolution of a secular Buddhism, it's pretty easy to see it happening. There are an increasing number of sites dedicated to the topic, a variety of perspectives about practice and scholarship, and even what it means to use the shorthand label secular Buddhist. We don't speak very much about how this evolution is taking place. What is the mechanism for the evolution of a non-biological social movement, if that's even what secular Buddhism is? Part of our practice is trying to get better at seeing what's really going on instead of what we think is going on. And that means a challenging examination of the components and processes that we often mistake for actual things, like our self, or the group with which we've formed an identity. Meme theory is one way of looking at this process of the proliferation and modification of bundles of ideas. And even discussing the potential to shake free from our memes is, if you'll forgive the choice of words, enlightening. And it may be through this liberative experience that we can open new opportunities for change. Tim Ward is the author of several books, including 3 spiritual travel adventures based on his 6 years living in Asia. His stories have appeared in 13 anthologies, including Best Travel Writing 2006 and 2010. Ward's commentaries on Asian life and culture have been broadcast by CBC Radio, and he gives frequent public talks based on his books. Tim still travels to South and East Asia several times a year, thanks to his work as an international communications consultant for economic, environmental, and development organizations. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice welcome tea. Read Zombies on Kilimanjaro, and that will make sense. And our guest today is Tim Ward. Tim, thank you so much for being here again.
It's a pleasure to be back.
So for the audience who has not heard your previous interview with us, that is episode 49, and we spoke with you about your book, What the Buddha Never Taught. So we give a bit of a lengthy background about you there, but why don't you give a little bit of a recap here for folks who are not as familiar?
Sure. I'm a Canadian itinerant traveler and wandering philosopher, I guess is one that you might try to put my life in context. And my first book, What the Buddha Never Taught, was written when I was a young man in my mid-20s traveling through Asia and living in a Buddhist monastery, about which that book was written. It's now about 25 years later. I'm now 53. This is my 6th book that's just come out, Zombies on Kilimanjaro. And my first book was published just as my son was born. And he was 20 years old when this book was written, and it's the story of him and I climbing this iconic mountain together. So in some ways, What the Buddha Never Taught and Zombies on Kilimanjaro have a lifetime in between them. It's a precious lifetime for me. And in this book, I tried to sort of go back to some of the early Buddhist roots of my thinking and wandering and musing, and then tie it into where I am at age 53 and the sense that I've made of life, especially since to support my son and myself through much of those years, I also developed a career as a communications consultant and specialist, which has given me some wonderful opportunities to travel the world, but also to think deeply about how we share ideas with each other and what it means to pass something from one person's mind to the next, whether it's author to reader, person to person, or father to son.
Yeah, these are excellent topics that you cover very well in the book. And for some folks who at the moment are scratching their head on two counts, first, wait, the book we're talking about is Zombies on Kilimanjaro, but this isn't the Halloween episode. What's up with that?
Right.
Sorry, it's not really about zombies, so that's why this isn't the Halloween episode. And second, why Zombies on Kilimanjaro, which is the book of Tim's that we're talking about that is just released, what that has to do with Buddhist practice. And you do actually go into that in here. So we'll talk a bit about the book, but there are a few things that I just wanted to mention to people is, first, the full title of the book is Zombies on Kilimanjaro, A Father-Son Journey Above the Clouds. And this is very much a father-son journey. So it does fit into that kind of category of book, but not neatly. Pleasantly, it colors outside the lines because many of the topics that Tim covers in it are above and beyond and are really quite insightful into how the mind works. And that's one reason that we're talking now. I also wanted to say in the new book that you make Star Wars and Terminator references right away. And later on, you mentioned They Live and Lord of the Rings references. So thank you for doing that, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that speaks to the shared world that I have with my 20-year-old, somewhere in between the things like Team Fortress and Fallout 3, the computer games that he's an expert with, and Paradise Lost and Aristotle's Poetics that I'm more familiar with. We found this common ground around Terminator movies.
Yeah, it is, and they're part of our culture, and they themselves could fit into the category of memes. We'll get to that in a second, though. One of the things that I did want to mention that I particularly admired in the book is that you have this ongoing dialogue with your son Josh throughout your trip as you are climbing Kilimanjaro together. And at the end of several of the chapters, you have italicized references back to your relationship with your father. And there's a beautiful contrast between these as you go throughout the book. Was it sometimes a bit challenging for you to write those passages about you and your dad?
Yes. In fact, that was really one of the toughest and yet most important parts of this book to write. This climb really transformed my relationship with my son Josh, from feeling like I'm the parent and he's the child, to really recognizing his own emerging manhood, and really being able to treat him as a fellow man and as an equal. And the conversations all the way up the mountain really helped us get there. It was I sometimes come back to biblical references like Abraham and Isaac going up the mountain together, which probably transformed their relationship too, although the biblical story there is a rather nasty one.
I was imagining
planning on sacrificing his son.
Yeah, probably eroded trust a little bit, I would say.
yeah, not really a great model for parental-child bonding, I think. But for me, this was a transformational journey up the mountain in terms of what happened to my son and my relationship. And at the same time, as we're having these conversations and we're really listening deeply to what it was like for me to raise him and what it was like for him to be raised by me, two very different conversations, I kept getting these flashes of my own relationship with my own father, and some of the things that Josh and I were able to resolve, some of the barriers between us that had grown up, as he was perceiving me as domineering and I was perceiving him as really needing to just do what I say. he wants to make something of himself. I mean, as those things fell away, I really felt the buffer that I still had towards my own dad, although I'm in my early 50s and he's now in his early 80s. And it led me to reflect on some of the key moments in my relationship with him, some of which hardened my heart against him in some ways. And yet, also in reflecting back on those things, I also saw the ways that he clearly had influenced me, in the ways that in which, despite a lifetime's efforts to not be like my dad, as a 53-year-old man, I'm kind of like my father a lot in some ways. And I got to say that writing the passages that I wrote, as honestly as I did, I'm a little worried about what my dad is going to think of them when he reads them, because some of them are the ways that he let me down, and some of them are the ways that I was unkind to him back.
Mm-hmm. You know, in reading those passages, I don't think you need to be as concerned about that, because the tone that comes from them is that, as many of these relationships are, as yours was with Josh, and as many of those who are listening, their relationships with their parents have challenges to them.
Right.
But the message that I got out of this, and I think that your dad will as well, is that he did help you grow, and you recognize that. However, it took you some time to get there. That's what came out of it.
That is sure true. You know, when you're in middle age and you've got your parents still alive and your children growing up, it's an amazing transitional time, right? You know, it's generational time, and I coming to terms with how much of your character, your personality, is formed not just by your parents' presence, but also by the stories they tell you about who you are. You know, or stories that may be part of who I am, and I have been telling my son stories about who he is. And plus, of course, all the stories that I read to him, the Harry Potter books, the Lord of the Rings books, you know, the stories that he and I shared growing up. Oh, this is what you were like when you were a little kid. So we create the character of the next generation with the stories that we pass on. And this was a moment in life when I really realized I'm this knot between two threads that are themselves going to be knots between threads of parent to child, parent to child. And it's a sort of a humbling one. It makes you feel kind of insubstantial. The stories pass through you instead of being you.
So let's use that as our segue of stories to memes, because one of the main topics that you have throughout the book, and this was part of your intent in something to do as you made this trip up Kilimanjaro, was to run by meme theory and your presentation of it with the average college student, which was personified by Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Do that for us. Give us kind of broad strokes of meme theory, because what we want to do is tie stories and memes together with Buddhist practice, which you do very nicely. And for folks who are getting the book, be sure to check out page 58. That's where a lot of this is sitting. That's kind of the hub of that connection. And then how it will eventually, and we'll get into topics of, okay, how does that impact things like secular Buddhism? So meme theory.
Right. Now, I know that Susan Blackmore was a guest on your show, and she's actually the person I first heard the term memes from. I watched a TED Talk that she was delivering on just this topic, and then went out immediately and bought her book, and since then I've read like a dozen other books on memes. To me, as a communications professional, memes is the most revolutionary and exciting idea about how ideas spread from person to person that I've really come across in my 30 years as a professional journalist, writer, and teacher.
Now, as I recall, this was something that Richard Dawkins had coined the term.
Exactly.
And then, and that was in Ancestor's Tale, is that correct?
I think it was in the Selfish Gene.
Selfish Gene, that's right. It's in Selfish Gene. Yeah. And then Sue ended up writing
book about it called The Meme Machine.
The Meme Machine, that's right. The Meme Machine is the title of her book. So, right. Okay, so Carrie, I want to make sure I got all my names right on that one.
So what is a meme? Most people have sort of heard the term by now, and they often think of it as something that is passed on around the internet, like an emoticon that someone picks up and is sending on, or a video that goes viral. Those are great examples of memes, but what they really are is it's an idea that is easily spread from one mind to another. Kind of like, if you can imagine a room full of people with unlit candles, and one person in the center has a flame, and they pass that flame to the people in their immediate circle who pass it on to others. And so in a matter of minutes, that flame can be spread to hundreds, even thousands of flames. That's the power of spreading an idea that we as human beings have really perfected. And Dawkins' insight was that just as genes spread from parent to offspring slowly through generations, and that drives evolution, so memes, ideas, spread from one mind to another very quickly. But that drives human cultural evolution, which has made change in our species an incredibly dramatic process. And I can explain the heart of why. See, genetic evolution is random. There's, things are eliminated, and lots of things are eliminated, and a few things succeed. So one generation gets a little better adapted to its environment. But humans are able to take something that changes and then purposefully innovate because our memes are drawn in certain directions. So here's a great example. The elephant, over hundreds of thousands of years, evolves these long, curved tusks. But now, they're stuck with them. When humans come along and say, "Ooh, I will kill elephants for their tusks," elephants can't devolve those tusks. And it's almost killed them. They've almost died out because of poaching. Humans, on the other hand, can pick up an idea and drop it when it no longer serves us. So a great example of a human idea, like the tusk, is when we started using sharpened stones 2.6 million years ago. We got that idea, and that idea spread from tribe to tribe, from culture to culture, and as it spread, it innovated, it evolved into scrapers and cutters, and eventually stone arrows, and then eventually into iron, swords, and spears. Everything with a blade evolves from that one idea of the sharpened stone. And when one technology ceases to serve us well, we can drop it and find another. Now, one interesting place where that applies right now is look how driven we are by a carbon economy. We're all dependent on our cars, our planes, our machines that run on gas. But if we really see that this behavior is creating climate change that will kill us, we could drop it in a decade and go totally towards solar, totally towards wind turbine. That's possible for us like no other species. So that's the power of memes in driving human evolution and change that has really made humans a dominant species on the planet.
And I would suggest that, and add on to what you're saying, is that a key difference between even a few hundred years ago and today is the potential rate of evolution and replicability of memes is so astronomically enhanced by technology, so that we're not as geographically limited in the rate of growth of our memes, that now we can share a new meme with someone on the other end of the planet right away. There's
right.
No intervening wait state of it having to make that journey to that location.
So think of the comparison to evolution. Our globe was connected to different continents, and when those continents were separate, they evolved slowly in their own different ways. So Australia's wildlife evolved much different than Africa's, than North America's wildlife. Connecting continents together would radically change evolution. Well, this is what we've done. Our minds are now part of the same continent, and memes zing back and forth. Also, gosh, just 100 years ago, there were only about 1 billion humans on the planet. Now, there's 8 billion, soon there will be 10 billion. So memes have more territory in which to grow and develop. So our mimetic evolution is not only fast, but it often feels like it's out of our control.
Mm-hmm. Now that's a good segue, because you and Sue Blackmore both you've studied memes and both have backgrounds with meditative practice, and yet have arrived at different positions on what runs the show, memes or us. And why don't you tell us your your expectation on that and how you arrived at that conclusion, because that ties into Buddhist practice.
Yeah, I think that it's a troubling thought that if every word is a meme, that every thought we have in language is a meme, if every single idea is a meme, then where's the us in amongst all these memes that are competing for our attention? Are we all just programmed by advertisers and education and who our parents have told us who we are? And if you look at the human mind as being defined by waking consciousness, our thoughts, then that's the conclusion you come to. But that's depending on whether or not you buy the Cartesian, I think, therefore I am. And I think, frankly, it's a deterministic and rather frightening world if you look at it like that. So when I ran into this idea, to me, the counter to it was this Buddhist notion that who we are as beings is not identified with the conscious mind, the monkey mind, the chattering thoughts in our head. The Buddhism are seen as the surface of what we are, and in fact a delusion. If we believe just that chatter, we're in a sense alienated from our Buddha nature. So Buddhism develops these amazing techniques to calm the mind, to have one-pointed concentration and silence that chatter, and then you drop into Satori, into something different. So the other technology Buddhism developed was the ability to move up above the conscious mind, to observe it, to watch the stream of consciousness as if standing on a bridge, and consciousness is just flowing by underneath you, to have pure awareness, and see that that pure awareness is a space. It's an entity separate from the thoughts that are in that stream. So in these two ways, Buddhism grasps that what it is to be human is different than consciousness itself. And there's one other way that I find it easy to approach. You can take a look at large mammals on the planet, or birds on the planet, that have incredible intelligence. Take a tiger, for example. Smart, can stalk its prey, knows who it is in the jungle, knows what it can do, is capable of quite amazing feats. And yet, a tiger probably doesn't have in its head, dum-de-dum-de-dum, which way am I going to go now? Oh, what was that sound? Oh, that sounded like a deer. I shall pursue it, right? There's no self talking to itself inside a tiger, but it has a being and an awareness of its being. So to me, this is other evidence that we are not our talking mind. And this is, to me, where Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism, not the religion of Buddhism, but the practice of Buddhism, cuts through this terrible part of meme theory, which says all you are is your memes. And that to me was this wonderful ability to join the 21st century and the 5th century BC.
Yeah. And you say, and this is just reading a little bit, that you talk about absorption meditation. The idea is to ground your awareness by connecting it to a physical, constant sense impression that exists underneath the level of your thoughts, that is, your memes.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is that what we do in our meditation is we do tease out and separate out those thoughts. That's not us. And
right.
What you're saying here is that that's a wonderful advantage to us, because instead of our thoughts and our stories and those constructs that you refer to as mimiplexes,
right.
Instead of them leading the show, because we have a practice of disengaging and observing them, we can make better choices based on what's happening and not engage with those, so that they're not running the show.
That's right. There is a place that you can stand inside yourself and make some judgments about what memes to accept and what to stay apart from. And I would add one more dimension to this, and that is that our memes are externalized in the objects that we create in the world. So many memes are actually seen as physical objects. The chair, to a meme theorist, the chair is the idea of a chair in a form that can be passed on to another mind just by looking at it. So what we've done in modern society is we have actually constructed so much of the world that it's possible to look around and only see memes, to only see your computer, your telephone, your glass, even the food in your refrigerator has been shaped into a meme. That chicken nugget has very little chickenness in it. It's mostly nugget.
Memes.
So memes can take up our whole world, and then what happens to our ability to have this wild, true, non-meme self? It starts to truly believe it's memes. And for my son's generation, they spend so much time on computers playing virtual reality games where literally that whole virtual reality is a world entirely made on a computer. It's all memes, and you sort of fear for a future in which there's nothing but memes. The Matrix world, right, where we've just got a jack plugged into the back of our neck that feeds straight to our skull.
That leads a bit to a question I wanted to ask around the attachment to our memes and how hard it is to dislodge them. Because you made a reference to Buddhism, the practice, not the religion.
Yes.
You have some experience with very evangelical traditions where the meme itself has kind of taken over, and how hard it is to dislodge those attachments. Tell us a bit about that.
Right. So this is the key thing about meme theory here is that a meme does not have to be true to be powerful. So you take a look at the memes that many people have in their head and the power of those memes. Believe in my God, or you deserve to die. Right? Or frankly, even believe in my political party, or I will violently rise up against you.
Right.
Right. So when people believe their memes, they can become taken over from them, almost like a virus takes over somebody. Perhaps the sort of virus that would turn one into a zombie. But there's the zombie metaphor in this book.
Yep.
So when your memes take you over and you believe in them as if they are reality, you in a sense turn into a zombie. And this lovely movie, this horrible B science fiction movie, to me really captures this. It's called They Live, and this movie is the story of an ordinary guy who finds a pair of sunglasses.
Well, Roddy Piper as an ordinary guy. So let's bear in mind he's a professional wrestler, everyone.
Yeah, all right. A big ordinary guy.
Ordinary guy, yeah.
He puts those glasses on, and he sees that the billboards aren't really advertisements. They're signs that say, obey. And the TV is really putting out words that say, don't question authority. And he notices that about 10% of the population are actually hideous aliens in disguise when he looks at these glasses. So to me, the glasses are the metaphor for being able to see memes in action.
See through our delusions.
Exactly. So you put those glasses on and you can be aware, that's a meme trying to get into my mind. Oh, look, there's the billboard. Drink Pepsi and you'll be happy. Right?
It's funny you mentioned that as the theme of why you have zombies in the title is, I made reference early on that this isn't the Halloween episode, but the very first Halloween episode we did do on Buddhism and zombies, this is what we're referring to when you go into a particular center and everyone there they've bought into the meme and they are talking differently. They're dropping their pronouns. They are emptier than thou. And this is an example of what you're talking about. They become zombies.
Exactly. So you could have Christian zombies and Buddhist zombies and Democrat zombies and Republican zombies. That's right. The memes are in control.
Yeah. Now, tell us about, we've touched on it already, the evolution of memes. We've already talked about it's not over long periods of time in a particular biological line. This is something that can spread horizontally in a single populace and, in fact, in all populace right away. So some of the opportunities we have there as our concern here is in secular Buddhism is there are some opportunities there in how we can help maybe guide that evolution. tell us about that, and is that even something that we can do as our decision if we separate from our thoughts?
Yes, I think so. And the real challenge for anybody with a good idea is how can you portray your thoughts in a way that makes it really easy for a new mind not only to get, but to want to be open to. So in other words, how can you construct the good meme? The meme which is genuinely beneficial, not a meme that's going to lead somebody into a delusion, but a meme that even points the way to the fact that all memes are just vehicles for a certain result. And I can tell you about one author who I think has done a fabulous job with this. Her name's Dee Willock, and she's got a new book out called Falling into Easy. Great title. Help for Those Who Can't Meditate. If you're an author, a good title for your book, well, that's an important meme.
Yeah.
So being able to say, to explain something about meditation in a way that's clear, crisp, and easy to grasp, that's a real gift. And frankly, for many people on a spiritual path, one of the things that they often stumble upon is trying to express those ideas that have changed their life in a way that is simple and inviting. And how many times do you run into people who's like, they're in the next best thing, and they're just aggressively, no, you got to try this. Oh, this will change your life. No, please sit down. Let me inject you with my meme.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
And that's in fact a very important lesson for us to bear in mind, and this does keep coming up on the show as we discuss things like our more aggressive atheist friends and colleagues who may be turning people off to their views because of the way in which they're engaging. We've used the phrase, don't be a dick, and this is in honor of Bill Plate's speech at the Amazing Meeting a couple of years ago, where he talked about exactly that topic, that people aren't convinced when you walk up to them and shout at them, you're wrong, you're an idiot, change your mind, do what I say now. None of us would find that appealing. Neither does anyone we would attack with that kind of message.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that this is your career at intermedia communications training, is helping people frame that message so that it is better received.
Yes, absolutely. And here, in fact, I find meme theory is also a really great tool for dealing with somebody who's got a zombie meme inside of them. And that is, you must realize that what you're dealing with is a meme, that self-preservation depends on not being dislodged from that person's mind. So it's actually been studied in psychological research that if you try to push someone to change their mind, you actually entrench them in their view. So it's not even a neutral thing. If you try to change somebody's mind too forcefully, you will entrench their current meme because it will be building better defenses to keep you out.
Yeah, we've had that discussion with Carol Tavris regarding cognitive dissonance and how that fits into memes protecting themselves.
Exactly.
It does entrench itself even more.
When you believe a set of memes, that belief goes right into your physiology, and you feel congruent in your life when those memes are active. So when one of those memes are challenged, you actually feel it like a physiological threat. So if you truly want someone to loosen the grip that their memes have on them, you can't put them into a position of threat to begin with. Because when we're in threat, our emotions shut down. We actually listen more poorly. So one of the things that I've learned as a communicator that's really valuable is when you run into somebody who's got a strong set of beliefs that's very different than yours, one of the best things that you can do, if you want to see if change is possible, is first, in a very friendly and open way, try to find out what it's like just to be them. Not to try to change them, but just to allow them to express themselves, with your only goal being to really get them, to just be with who they are.
Deep listening.
Yeah, exactly. Deep listening. And only from such a space of deep listening will the other person begin to relax when they see that what you want to do is just know them. And as you know them and as they reveal themselves, there may be a space for you to ask questions that are open questions that invite them to unfold what it is that makes them hold to particular positions. You're not trying to change their mind. You're just getting them to literally unpack some of that mimetic DNA. And often when people do that, if they really have some trust in you, you can find places, or they become aware of places, where there's not as much congruence with those memes in the rest of their life as they may at first pretend that there is. And that stuff creates change.
Yeah, it does. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure the listeners are aware of is that there is value in storytelling. There is positive and beneficial effects to our stories, that's not something to automatically discount because it's just a myth or just a story. Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the value of our stories, and one reason that we can use things like scientific methods to help keep us honest about what these stories are communicating.
Right, absolutely. And let me start by telling just a little anecdote from the book. I'm telling a story to Josh about my own Buddhist musings and trying to get beyond this idea of the self as something solid. And I'm coming to see that the self is really just the incrustation of all the stories we believe about ourselves, as if that defines who we are. And I told Josh that I was sort of wrestling with the idea of no self, and he was about 6 years old. And as I was wrestling with this and writing about it, Josh was sort of playing in the kitchen in front of me, and I realized, I'm not doing him a favor by telling him stories about who he is. I'm actually, as his father, I'm actually turning him into a self. I'm teaching him a delusion, and this is wrong. And I said to Josh, you're not really Josh.
You're the 6-year-old.
He stopped playing with his Megazords at that point. He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Josh is just a name that's used for the being that is not really Josh." And he says, "So I'm not Josh? What am I?" At which point I realized that precipitating an existential crisis in a 6-year-old is not particularly good parenting.
Yeah, that's the Buddhist admonishment that not only should the message be true and sincere and positively intended, but also well-timed.
Exactly. That was not well-timed. As I told Josh the story of this as we're doing the climb, and he said, "Geez, Dad, what were you thinking?" And really, talk about the wrong place at the wrong time. But our stories do give us our sense of who we are, and to live in human community, well, that's what it is. It's to be a person with stories. In fact, the tragedy of Alzheimer's is people lose their stories. They lose their entire sense of who they are. And that's a person who can't remember anything or anybody. That's not an enlightened state. That's a state of our mind deteriorated. Why? Because our minds have been shaped for memes, for stories, and stories are an incredibly powerful vehicle for transferring memes. And when you look at human cultural evolution, you see patterns emerging in stories that become myths, that become archetypes, that give us a sense of our identity, that can be in a very positive way if we hold them loosely instead of tightly. And this is another way for me that seeing things as memes help me understand that we need to be able to have a story of ourselves, but not become wedded to it, not buy it totally. And immediately, what came to my mind when I was thinking this way is the old parable of the Buddha describing enlightenment itself as like a raft. You use a raft to cross a river. When you get to the other side, you don't put the raft on your back and carry it. So use your stories, use your memes to create your life, but don't get stuck with them. They're just a tool to live a good life. And when it ceases serving you well, let it go. Put it down. And this might mean for us as a culture, as a civilization, carbon burning has been a tool that's helped us a lot. It's time to let it go and put it down.
And that's a perfect segue. But let's go into that, because another key theme that you have in the book is one that is also near and dear to my heart and should be to all of us, and that of climate change. And I'm not going to go on a rant here, listeners, so don't worry. I'm not going to go there. But we are going to talk for a little bit about two of the two ecological themes, Tim, that you talk about in the book. And I want you to have a chance to chat about that, because these are our memes are impacting the real world in a negative way, and we need to change that. And in order to do that, we need to quite literally change our minds and change our memes. So tell us about what you observed as you were hiking on Kilimanjaro.
Sure. You know, even before going to Kilimanjaro, I knew that what was happening on the top with the glaciers was clear evidence for climate change. In fact, Al Gore used the glaciers of Kilimanjaro in his talk in Inconvenient Truth. And he correctly said that the glaciers had shrunk by, I think it was something like 30% between the 1970s and the year 2000 when he did his talk. Now, he ignited the firestorm, especially amongst those who want to disprove global warming, because in fact the glaciers have been melting slowly for the past century. Nobody knows exactly why, but it is a fact. But actually the glaciers have sped up their melting. They've almost doubled the previous rate between 1970 and 2000, and now they're melting even faster. Every time a scientist puts out a new research paper, there's this firestorm of people from both sides of the spectrum, from the 99.9% of the scientific climatologists who say, yeah, evidence that something is happening that's new in the climate, and then the tiny 0.01% who want to disprove that.
Who will deny it no matter what evidence is faced.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, Kilimanjaro itself is a huge treasure trove of evidence about climate change. Its glaciers are more than 11,000 years old. And scientists have drilled cores through these glaciers, which have little bubbles of air trapped in them all the way down, which lets us know what's the carbon component, what's the CO2 component of Africa from 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. This data doesn't exist anywhere else. So to me, the glaciers in Kilimanjaro are sort of like these giant ice Dead Sea Scrolls that have an amazing amount of data. So it's tragic that they're melting so fast. And scientists, in fact, have taken some of those cores and preserved them in refrigerators for future scientists to study with more advanced technology than we have today, because those glaciers will be gone within 20 years. So that was my knowledge. But what surprised me when I got to the top of Kilimanjaro was actually seeing glaciers crumbling and melting literally before my eyes, being able to see the empty moraines with the glaciers at the further end of them, being able to see the wall of glaciers that's retreating so much from what it was just a handful of years ago. And I realized at that point that one of the limitations of our amazing human minds is we can only really grasp things on a human scale. It's hard to grasp that the climate is changing at a pace unprecedented in our history, because we just are driven by the weather, not by the climate. But to be there and see those glaciers shrinking almost literally before my eyes really hit me, the scope and scale of climate change. And I was wishing, how could we, show people that these glaciers are like a rapidly melting popsicle, right? We can see a popsicle melt in 10 minutes, but we can't see a glacier melt in 10 years.
Right. Well, tell us about some of the effects of deforestation and how that impacts things like fog stripping and all of that.
Right. Interestingly enough, at Kilimanjaro, there's a second driver of climate change at lower altitudes. Kilimanjaro is it's the most amazing thing in the world, Ted, when you fly into this. You fly in through this rough red and gray and tan colored savanna that's just a huge desert and scrubland. And then you see this incredible mass of green. And when you fly near Kilimanjaro, you're looking up at the peak. And it's got this white crown, this huge gray bed zone, and then this incredible, huge circle of green. These beautiful cloud forests, high-altitude cloud forests, and then rivers and low-altitude forests surrounding it in the foothills. It's the most amazing thing in the world to fly into Kilimanjaro. But those lower forests are a very complex ecological cycle that depends on moisture that is cloud at the higher altitudes, and the clouds get sucked of their moisture by these trees that have the dew settles on them, and it trickles down to the roots, and it goes into the ground, which is moist and spongy and mossy, and it forms rivers which go all the way down to the lower altitudes where the big trees soak them up in their roots, bring them into their leaves. The leaves evaporate the moisture in the sun. It turns into a cloud, and it goes up, and it's this beautiful water vapor cycle. What you've had on Kilimanjaro is you've had more and more people moving into this great fertile area in the middle of this desert. And when they move in, especially if they're poor, they need to heat their food. It's hot, so people don't need that much warmth, but they need food for cooking. And so the forests have been seriously cut back. And then there's coffee plantations, and there's potato plantations. So all of this is eating up the forest. The government declared a moratorium. There's no more cutting allowed around Kilimanjaro. But we're talking about a government in Africa, in a country which is very, very poor. So when we were going into Kilimanjaro ourselves, we were seeing streams and streams of villagers going the other way, each with a load of raw wood on their head, being carried back to their families. And I learned, to my dismay, that most of that wood is cut from the mountains, or cut from the foothills, brought down and turned into charcoal.
Making the problem even worse.
Right. So, and you even have to ask, and I don't know the answer to this, how much of the tourist industry, which brings 40,000 tourists a year to Kilimanjaro, how much of that may in fact fuel some of the deforestation that's taking place. Human-caused climate change at a local level, which is going on so rapidly that if those forests aren't preserved, Kilimanjaro will turn into a desert. The forest will disappear.
And that's really one of the main things that I want to make sure that we have the chance to talk about, because that was something that was very moving as you spoke about this in the book, is that as that changes, it's not just, oh, a few trees have gone away, oh, it's drier. It's like, no, the very difficult quality of life that people who are dependent on this thriving ecological environment are dependent on, they're also impacted by this. Because if that goes away, they can't survive, and it's already hard enough.
Exactly. How tragic. The people who live around Kilimanjaro, in order to survive, are cutting down the very source of their nourishment, the very source that makes living in that area possible, they are destroying. And if we think that's tragic, that's what we are doing globally with our environment. It's easier to see it on Kilimanjaro.
So Tim, all of the work that you're doing about memes and that interest in that, how does that tie in with your Zombies on Kilimanjaro and the trip with your son?
You know, I think I didn't really realize it until I had climbed to the summit and come back down and my brain was working again.
I'm laughing because I just the other day read the section where you kind of lost your mind after you got to the peak. So you got to tell about that too.
Yeah. You know, it hit me that there's a reason why spiritual seekers in times past climbed high mountains. And what it is that a mountain, and Kilimanjaro is just the best example of this I can think of. A mountain is not a meme. You get on the side of that sucker and you feel infinitesimal. You can't make it anything. It is itself. it's small enough. It's not the size of the Earth or the universe. It's small enough that we tiny humans can grasp how vast it is. And when you stand before something that's vast, you feel awe. And awe goes beyond your memes. It makes you feel in contact with this life that is so big, it overwhelms your mind. And in that moment of being overwhelmed, your mind shakes free of its memes. All the more so when high altitude is involved. And as I'm actually climbing up the mountain, I'm realizing, oh my God, my brain is shutting down. I am actually becoming a zombie without a single thought except keep on climbing up. So that's a sort of other sense in which one can become a zombie. But it like knocks the memes out of your mind. And I realize this is why people climb the mountain, to get a vision. Something new can be born when you're shaken free of your memes. So that's why I think going out into the wilderness is really important, why going to a place that fills you with awe. Maybe this is why Tibetans really became one of the most spiritual cultures on earth, because they lived in these mountains which just strike you dumb with their vastness, right? So that to me made sense, that the wild nature, the amazing planet on which we live, can help cure us when our memes have too tight a grip on us. And one of the last chapters in the book is called Still Itself, and Josh and I recognize that one of the things that's amazing about Kilimanjaro is for all the tourists that crawl up and down its neck, this mountain is still itself. Its raw, unmemed reality punctures the stories and the patterns and the memes that we carry with us. And when we experience that, we come away reborn, fresh, new, able to think new thoughts, be able to create a new future.
So I'm going to move a step over again and just chat for a few minutes about, there's a quote you have in the book. It's on page 112 for those who are getting the book and want to follow along. You know, the very strength of science is that it keeps us from the errors of mythos, from getting committed to a set of memes that we adopt because of congruence with what we think we know. Science demands skepticism. As we've just been talking about with the evidence for things like climate change or any other particular kind of challenge to a meme of privilege, we have difficulty with that, and science and skepticism helps. Tim, tell us about how that can help us dislodge those really sticky memes that are perhaps damaging to us.
Mm-hmm. If we keep in mind that our brains were forged on the African savanna, that very same savanna that's on the outskirts of Kilimanjaro, they evolved to make practical decisions that helped us live and thrive in that harsh environment. They didn't evolve to have absolute knowledge of anything. Our mind, our memes, are a tool. Now, the amazing thing about the human mind is we've been able to use that tool and adapt it and craft it and create instruments that allow us to see the vast, infinite sky, to see billions of light years away at galaxies and stars, and to look so deeply into the things that are close that we can see the very structure of molecules and atoms, and we can measure how subatomic particles move. Our minds have done incredible things, but they are not constructed to know the truth. They're only constructed to interpret sense impressions. So if we take that as a starting point, we can become skeptical of any claim to an absolute truth. And it says, so as we seek to better know reality, we need to be constantly skeptical of what we think we know, because our memes are telling us that. And we need to keep coming back to our sense impressions, to the data we can observe, and the sense we can make of that, always with a new idea. Because you know what? We're never going to get it 100% right. That's not what our brains do. It only gives an approximation.
Yeah, we were evolved to be pattern-seeking beings. That's what
Right.
helped us survive. And if we made a mistake and saw a pattern that wasn't there, no harm, no foul. If we
Right.
didn't see a pattern and something was there, we got eaten. So we
Right.
actually evolved to sometimes see to read additional patterns into our environment that aren't necessarily so. And this really manifests in our ideas, in our memes.
Right. And sometimes those ideas are helpful to our survival. That doesn't make them true. It might be that the idea of a big man in the sky who made us out of clay and gave us rules to live by helps a tribe survive in the fierce, in the fierce deserts of Palestine. It may be that the story of a prince who leaves it all behind to go and sit in the wilderness and become a spiritual being unlike any other. That may be very helpful for a certain culture to thrive. Right? These are our stories. These are our myths. They're patterns that are helpful. But as soon as we believe them, we shut out the possibility of taking in new information, and our minds have turned us into zombies.
Right, and that's what I see as the evolutionary opportunity, and I think inevitability of a secular approach to this practice, because we are becoming, as the statistics show us, a more secular society, and the practice itself can evolve and still provide very helpful and beneficial practices, as Tim has been saying, with our ability to recognize our memes for what they are and for what they aren't.
Right.
Well, our guest today has been Tim Ward. You can find out more about what Tim has been doing at his website, timwardsbooks.com. That's TIMWARDS books.com. And if you're interested in some of his other work, and bear in mind I do have links to this on the episode page for this episode, you can also find out more about his professional work on intermediact.com, and that's for Intermedia Communications Training. Tim, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to get to talk to you again.
My pleasure, Ted, and to all of your listeners, may you be the master of your memes.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.